She walked into the airport in heels and a tailored suit. Dr. Monique Ellison is a powerhouse CEO behind one of the largest tech healthcare partnerships in the country. Her destination: a private meeting to finalize a $4 billion deal, one that would define the future of commercial travel and healthcare tech. But minutes before takeoff, everything changed. Security pulled her aside. No explanation, no apology, just suspicion wrapped in silence. A black woman in first class. To them, that was cause enough. They didn't know she wasn't just a passenger. She was the dealmaker behind the airline's biggest future contract. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She made one phone call, and the entire industry felt the aftershock. This isn't just a story of prejudice. It's a lesson in quiet power and how one decision cost an airline billions. The security team escorted her off the plane in full view of other passengers, some whispering, others recording. No one knew who she was. Not yet. The flight departed without her. But by the time it landed, headlines had already started to spread. Dr. Ellison didn't raise her voice. She simply contacted her board. Then she contacted the airline's competitors. By the end of the week, the $4 billion contract for exclusive in-flight health tech, diagnostics, and real-time AI monitoring was gone, reassigned, rebranded to an airline that understood partnership wasn't just about revenue. It was about respect. What began as an act of racial profiling turned into one of the costliest misjudgments in corporate aviation history. And for Dr. Monique Ellison, it wasn't revenge. It was a reminder. Never underestimate who you're dismissing, because sometimes the person you try to push aside is the one holding your future in their hands. Behind closed doors, executives scrambled. Calls flooded in from investors. Stock prices trembled. The airline's PR team issued a rushed apology, bland, corporate, and 2 days too late. But Dr. Ellison didn't respond to it. She was already in meetings with rival carriers, quiet rooms, firm handshakes, and nods of respect. Airlines who recognized her not just as a client, but as a visionary. They asked questions. They listened. And most importantly, they didn't judge her by the color of her skin. Within 72 hours, the new deal was signed. A new airline, a new partner, and a $4 billion future that now flew under different wings. Meanwhile, the original airline found itself trending not for innovation, but for humiliation. Their competitors took off. They were grounded in scandal. And Dr. Monique Ellison, she didn't need headlines or hashtags. She had legacy. She had leverage. And she used it not to destroy, but to redirect. Because real power isn't loud. It's strategic. It's quiet. And when it moves, it reshapes the sky. Watch until the end. Because one woman's grace under fire became the storm that too changed an entire industry. The airline's boardroom was in chaos. Investors were calling every hour, demanding answers. Emails leaked. The story hit every major news outlet. Black CEO pulled from plane, pulls $4 billion deal in response. Social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag fly with respect and hashtag Monique Ellison trended worldwide. Yet through all the noise, Dr. Ellison remained silent. She didn't need to clap back online. Her actions were already rewriting the rules. Behind the scenes, she met with executives from Altavia Air, a rising competitor known for its progressive leadership and customer-first approach. In a private glass-walled conference room overlooking San Francisco's skyline, they signed a deal that would make history. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle. Altavia would now be the exclusive carrier equipped with her company's AI health diagnostics, real-time biometric alerts, and next-generation wellness pods in first and business class. A transformation once meant to debut on a legacy airline now belonged to a brand built for the future. And Dr. Ellison, She didn't just switch partners, she changed the narrative. The airline that profiled her, their CEO issued a video apology's tone robotic, his face uncomfortable. But it was too late. Activists called for boycotts. Black business leaders pulled corporate accounts. The airline lost contracts, partnerships, and billions in projected revenue. Meanwhile, Monique's LinkedIn post, a single paragraph with a quiet photo of her boarding an Altavia jet, garnered over 10 million views. Dignity doesn't raise its voice. It just walks away and takes the future with it. That was her caption. It became a mantra, a lesson in the boardrooms, a case study in business schools. Later that year, Forbes named her one of the most influential women in global industry. Time magazine called her story a masterclass in modern power. But Monique didn't do it for the awards. She did it for every young Black girl watching, for every professional who's been underestimated, for everyone who's ever been asked to prove they belong when they already own the seat. Because, sometimes, the strongest statement isn't a speech, it's a decision, and hers. It cost an empire, and built another. Months passed, but the ripple effect of that single moment in the airport never stopped expanding. The airline that had removed Dr. Monique Ellison now struggled under mounting pressure. Congressional hearings were called to investigate racial profiling in transportation. Civil rights leaders used the incident as fuel for a larger campaign, access without assumption. CEOs across industries quietly reviewed their corporate travel partnerships, hoping not to be next in the spotlight. But Monique didn't watch it all from the sidelines. She rose. Her company, Neurovita Tech, experienced a meteoric rise. With Altavia Air as its primary aviation partner, it expanded into high-speed rail, private charter, and even luxury cruise liners' mode of travel where health data, biometric, safety, and elite service could be seamlessly integrated. And Monique, she became more than a CEO. She became a movement. Universities requested her as a commencement speaker, not for her business acumen alone, but for what she symbolized: poise under pressure, dignity in the face of disrespect, and the type of case, and the type of strength that doesn't have to announce itself to be felt. At a keynote event in Geneva, she stood before a crowd of world leaders and CEOs and simply said, "You don't have to fight to be seen. Just keep building. And when the world finally looks your way, let what you've built speak for itself." The room gave her a standing ovation. Meanwhile, the airline that profiled her lost more than money. It lost trust, once known as a titan of global air travel. It became a cautionary tale in HR workshops and day trainings. But Monique never gloated. Instead, she used a portion of the $4 billion contract profits to start an initiative called Gate A1, a nonprofit that provides mentorship and funding for young women of color in STEM, especially those pursuing careers in tech, aviation, and leadership. Every year, she personally awards 10 travel fellowships to girls who've never flown before, one escorted through the same airport, walking first class, heads high. Because for Monique, this was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the story, not just hers, but for every woman who's ever been doubted, dismissed, or delayed. And in the end, what she showed the world is that grace isn't weakness. It's strategy, it's power, and when wielded by the right hands, it doesn't just land the plane. It charts a whole new sky. 2 years later, Monique Ellison stood at the grand opening of the Ellison Institute for Leadership and Innovation, a glass and steel monument on the West Coast built with proceeds from the Altavia partnership. Inside, young minds buzzed: women, people of color, first-generation scholars learning not only how to lead, but how to rise with integrity in spaces that weren't built for them. Outside, the media gathered not to ask about the past, but to understand how a single act of quiet defiance had reshaped so many futures. In a rare interview, she was asked, Would you do it all again the same way? Monique paused, smiled. Every moment was a lesson. Every seat I was denied became a stage I stood on later. The interviewer leaned in. And the airline. Still flying, she said calmly, but never at the same altitude. In private, the former airline had tried to rebuild Bridges' offering. Partnerships, donations, even a request to feature her in their diversity campaigns. She declined every one, not out of spite, out of principle, because she believed in something stronger. Then a headline. Accountability. The CEO who had issued the half-hearted apology eventually stepped down. Shareholders demanded a cultural overhaul. Training programs were implemented. But it was all reactionary. Monique's impact had been revolutionary. Back at the Ellison Institute, murals stretched across the main hallway. A black woman in a sleek suit walking through an airport terminal. Backlit by the rising sun. Suitcase in hand, no guards, no confrontation. Just motion at the bottom of the mural in soft gold letters. Read her quote, "They can try to stop your flight, but they'll never stop your rise." The story of Dr. Monique Ellison became required reading. In business ethics courses, airlines rewrote their employee conduct manuals. Boardrooms looked different, more representative, more reflective. And somewhere, in airports across the country, little girls with natural curls and bright eyes walked past gates, holding their mothers' hands, looking up at screens, and dreaming not just of travel, but of legacy, because of one woman. One decision, and a story that took off the moment someone tried to hold it down. And now, it flies on its own. Years later. The world didn't just remember what happened at that airport gate. They studied it. Harvard Business School developed an entire case study called The Flight That Changed Corporate Culture. It wasn't about outrage. It was about leverage. About how one woman turned indignity into innovation and how silence, when powered by strategy, can echo louder than any protest. Dr. Monique Ellison, now affectionately known among young entrepreneurs as the Quiet Storm, had become a global icon. Her presence was rare, but seismic. She didn't flood social feeds with selfies or speeches. She moved in silence, like legacy builders do, letting her impact shape the conversation, while the airline industry scrambled to rebuild its public image. Ellison focused on the future. She launched a new project, Skygun, a coalition of aviation, tech, and healthcare executives committed to creating safer, more equitable experiences for passengers around the world. Her innovation now powered medical tech in private jets, space tourism capsules, and even long-haul expeditions to Mars training flights. And yet, she always made time for what mattered most. Each year, she returned to the very airport where the incident happened, not for revenge, but for ritual. She walked through the same terminal, past the same gate, this time escorted not by security, but by the girls of her Gate A1 initiative. Bright eyes, bold dreams. Each one of them wearing the signature blue blazer she once wore the day she was pulled aside. But now, instead of being stopped, they were welcomed with applause. TSA officers offered warm greetings. Gate agents smiled with pride. And other passengers, those who recognized her, simply stood up and moved aside, letting history walk past at a press event. One reporter finally asked her what that moment meant to her. She looked at the young girl standing behind her, then turned to the camera. "It means the future is already boarding. And this time, no one gets left behind." Back at her jet, now branded with the logo of her foundation, not a corporation, Monique took her seat. She looked out the window as the plane taxied. The sky was clear. The runway long. The world still watching. And just before takeoff, one of the girls leaned forward and whispered, "Dr. Ellison, I want to be like you one day." She smiled, gently squeezed her hand and said, "Don't be like me. Be better. Fly higher. And when they try to stop you, remember, we don't fight for seats. ... We build the plane." Then the engines roared, the wheels lifted, and once again, Dr. Monique Ellison soared, not just above the clouds, but above the noise. Forever. Change forever rising. It was a cool spring morning when Dr. Monique Ellison received a letter. Not an email, not a social post. A real letter delivered in a white envelope, marked with the seal of the very airline that once pulled her from her seat without cause. Inside, the letter was brief. It wasn't an apology. It was a request. They wanted her to return not as a passenger, but as an advisor. The new CEO, a woman of color named Aisha Grant, had taken over after years of corporate shakeups. She had followed Monique's rise since grad school, and now she wanted to meet, talk, to listen, to change things for good. Monique held the letter quietly for a long time. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. Instead, she flew commercial that week, unannounced. Not on a private jet, not with a camera crew, just herself, a book, and her usual quiet presence. She boarded a different airline, one that had believed in her vision from the start. And during the flight, something unexpected happened. A young flight attendant, maybe no older than 23, approached her nervously. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I just wanted to thank you. Because of you, I'm here." Monique looked up. "Because of me?" "Yes," the girl said, smiling. "Your story, it helped rewrite our company policy. They used your name in training. You helped make us better." Monique nodded, quietly moved. The flight continued peacefully. Number 1 pulled her aside. No one questioned her place. And for the first time in years, she looked out at the clouds and just relaxed. When she returned home, the letter sat on her desk again. This time, she penned a response. "Dear Ms. Grant, progress is possible, but trust must be earned, not requested. If you're ready to do more than repair the past, if you're ready to reimagine the future, then yes, let's talk. Sincerely, Dr. Monique Ellison." That meeting would go on to spark a new era in air travel. Transparent anti-bias audits, inclusive leadership tracks, a partnership between competing airlines to share best practices, and the first ever passenger Bill of Dignity, authored in part by Monique herself. In the years that followed, airports across the nation added a new kind of gate to their terminals, not marked A, B, or C, but Gate E for Ellison. A quiet tribute, a daily reminder that sometimes the most powerful flight path isn't upward, it's forward. And the woman who had once been pulled off a plane, she had become the compass, guiding an entire industry to rise not just in altitude, but in humanity. The unveiling of Gate E was a quiet ceremony by design. No massive press push, no viral campaign. Just a smooth dedication attended by students, pilots, crew members, and families whose lives had been touched by Monique Ellison's unwavering grace. The signage was simple. A brass plate by the glass window read Gate E, in honor of Dr. Monique Ellison for proving that dignity doesn't have to shout to move mountains. As the crowd stood in respectful silence, a young girl, barely 12, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big, stepped up to the microphone. She was one of the first graduates of Gate A1's mentorship program. Her voice trembled at first, but then she steadied herself. "Because of Dr. Ellison, I know what leadership looks like. It looks like stillness. It looks like patience. And it looks like knowing who you are, Van, when others don't." Monique stood quietly in the corner, wiping away a tear she hadn't expected to shed. She wasn't just witnessing history. She was watching it unfold through the hands of a new generation, one that wouldn't beg for a seat at the table, but build their own with steel, courage, and care. That evening, back at her home, Monique sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered beneath a dusk-orange glow. Her assistant came in with one more delivery of framed photo. It was from a recent Altavia Air campaign in it. 4 black women sat in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, smiling confidently. The caption below said, "From passengers to pilots." Because one woman didn't stay seated. She laughed softly, full, grounded, free, not out of pride, but peace. Her work had rippled far beyond boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. It had landed in the hearts of people who once believed their dreams were too much or out of reach. She had changed the altitude of expectation in her final public address before retiring from day-to-day leadership. She left one parting message to a packed room of global executives and scholars. You don't need revenge when you have results. They pulled me off a plane. I pulled a generation into their purpose. Let that be the legacy. Not what they did, but what we built. Anyway, applause erupted. Not the kind that comes from a trending name, but the kind that builds in the bones. That says, you didn't just survive it. You transformed it. And as Dr. Monique Ellison walked off that stage for the final time, a child in the front row stood up, clapped alone, and whispered to her mother, "That's who I want to be when I grow up." The mother leaned down and smiled. "You don't have to wait. You're already on your way. Now board your gate, baby. Your flight's about to take off." Dr. Monique Ellison's retirement was anything but an ending. It was a transition from being the engine behind innovation to becoming the wind beneath others' wings, though she stepped back from the CEO role at NeuroVitatech. She remained deeply involved in mentorship and global advocacy. Her foundation, Flight Forward, began expanding into new industries: maritime tech, space biosafety, and educational travel programs that allowed underrepresented youth to explore the world and themselves at the same time. And every summer, Monique hosted the Gate A1 Summit, gathering not of CEOs but of dreamers, high schoolers, first-year university students, young engineers, and quiet thinkers with loud futures. She walked among them without security, without fanfare, and always with the same question: what are you building that they said you couldn't? One year, during a breakout session, a young woman named Donnie stood up. A robotics student from New Orleans. She had grown up on stories of Monique's airport incident like it was a modern folktale. Now she stood face to face with the woman who had unknowingly shaped her future. "Dr. Ellison," Donnie said, voice trembling, "they told me I'd never make it in aerospace, that it wasn't a space for girls like me. But I saw your story on the wall of my school. I printed out your quote. I taped it to my mirror. Now, I'm building a prototype for long-range flight stabilization." Monique didn't say a word at first. She simply walked forward, hugged Donnie, and said, "Don't let the sky be your limit if you were born to reprogram gravity." That quote would go on to become the slogan of a global initiative promoting women in aviation and space exploration. Within 2 years, Donnie's prototype earned her a NASA fellowship. Within 5, she launched her own startup, Skyroots Dynamics, funded by the Ellison Angel Fund, a quiet branch of Monique's philanthropic empire. As Monique aged, her legacy didn't dim, radiated in new directions. Murals appeared in airports in South Africa, Japan, Brazil, and Canada. Always near Gate E schools in underserved communities were named in her honor. The Smithsonian opened a permanent exhibit, The Flight Path of Change: How One Woman Redefined Leadership. But perhaps the most powerful moment came on her 70th birthday. A surprise tribute video played during the annual summit. In it, pilots, engineers, teachers, students, even former TSA agents shared what her story had meant to them. Of the montage, a familiar face appeared: Aisha Grant. now chairwoman of the reformed airline that had once profiled Monique, looked into the camera and said, "You didn't just challenge us. You transformed us. And because of you, we don't board people by class anymore. We board them by community, by who they are and what they contribute. Thank you for teaching us how to fly better." Tears welled in Monique's eyes, not out of pride, but out of deep, fulfilled purpose. She had been removed from one flight, but in doing so, she had helped countless others take theirs. That night, under a sky lit with gentle drone lights forming the words "Keep Rising," Monique sat alone for a moment, watching the stars, and she whispered into the night, "Let them remember what we did, not when they gave us a seat, but when we built our own wings." And from that quiet corner of a starlit field, the future kept soaring. One story, one gate, one woman. Forever flying. In the twilight years of her journey, Dr. Monique Ellison found peace not in accolades or titles, but in the quiet ripple of her legacy unfolding day by day, person by person. She began writing not a memoir, but letters, hundreds of them, handwritten, personal, often sent without ceremony to people she'd met only briefly. A young gate agent who stood up for a passenger, a student who froze during a panel and apologized afterward, a nurse on a late-night flight who offered her water, not knowing who she was. Each note began the same way: "You may not remember me, but I remember your grace." These letters would one day be compiled into a best-selling book called The Quiet Ledger, letters from a woman who watched the world change from 30,000 feet. It wasn't just a bestseller. It was a blueprint for those who wanted to lead without cruelty, rise without ego, and walk away from injustice with more than just pain, with purpose. And then, one winter morning, something unexpected happened. A school on the south side of Chicago was renamed the Ellison School of Aeronautical and Human Innovation. The principal was a former mentee, the architect, a woman who had once seen Monique speak at a bus stop rally years ago. The opening ceremony was filled with laughter, tears, and a flight simulation lab where every young student was taught not just to fly but to lead from wherever they stood. A new plaque was unveiled at the school entrance. It read, "You may remove someone from a seat, but you can never remove them from their calling." Her altitude was never defined by airlines. It was defined by impact. That same day, Monique, now 78, received a package from NASA. Inside was a framed certificate, a thank you letter, and a tiny keepsake, a micro-etched disc carrying 100 names of Black pioneers in technology and justice, encoded to board the Artemis 3 lunar mission. One of those names was hers. And so, in her final years, Monique Ellison, once a woman told she didn't belong on a plane, would have her name carried beyond the sky to the moon at her last public appearance, surrounded by mentees, astronauts, pilots, and grandmothers who had followed her story. Since the beginning, someone asked her the final question, "Dr. Ellison, after all this time, what do you want your legacy to be?" She looked into the camera, her voice still calm and steady. "I don't want statues. I don't want airports named after me. I want doors that stay open, and young people who no longer flinch when someone questions whether they belong." She smiled. "Let that be the legacy. Not that I fought to fly, but that others learned to soar because I did." And with that, she stepped off the stage one last time, not into retirement, but into the quiet sunset of a mission fulfilled. Above her, a plane crossed the sky, sunlight catching its wings, and beneath it, the world kept moving forward with dignity, with vision, and with the kind of strength that doesn't demand attention. Because it earns altitude, forever flying, forever. Ellison. The years drifted on, gentle as a glider in an open sky. And though Dr. Monique Ellison spoke less and appeared rarely in public, her presence was everywhere. In the airport gates redesigned with her policies, in the tech startups run by former Gate A1 mentees, in the quiet confidence of black girls, who walked into boardrooms and STEM labs like they belonged because they did. Then one day, a call came in to the Ellison Institute. It was from the International Space Governance Council. They were planning the first intercontinental orbital conference, a gathering aboard a state-of-the-art space station designed for global leadership summits. The council, made up of representatives from 20 nations, wanted one name to be etched into the titanium entrance hatch, Dr. Monique Ellison, not because she was the richest, not because she was the loudest, but because her story had become the standard of what happens when grace meets pressure and still rises, when her name was unveiled in zero gravity. Every astronaut aboard stood at attention. A digital quote, engraved into the main hall's display, floated above the Earth like a beacon. They tried to delay my departure, so I redefined the destination. Back on Earth, Monique received the live stream link at her garden retreat. Near the Blue Ridge Mountains, she watched in silence, hand resting on a folded letter on her lap, a letter addressed to the young girl she once was. Later that week, she finally opened it and read aloud. "Dear Monique, they will question your worth. They will try to measure you with narrow tools. Smile. Keep walking. One day, they'll realize they were standing in the presence of something they couldn't name." Yet, she smiled gently and tucked it back in the envelope. A few months later, the age of 81, Dr. Monique Ellison passed peacefully in her sleep. There were no breaking news banners, no media frenzy. Just a quiet message from the Ellison Foundation. She boarded her final flight. No turbulence, no delay. Legacy intact. Mission complete. What followed, however, was a global chorus in cities across the world. Airport speakers were silenced for 60 seconds. Planes paused before taxi, at Gate E locations across continents. Children placed handwritten notes on benches. "Thank you for building wings we could wear." The White House, the UN, even the Vatican issued statements. But none were more powerful than a simple chalk message left on the sidewalk outside the original airport where it all began. She never needed the seat. She was the runway. To this day, pilots whisper her name before takeoff. Students recite her quotes before launching business ideas. And in the corner of a quiet flight museum, there's a preserved boarding pass from that long-ago Flight 1 that never took off with her aboard. It's encased in glass with a simple engraving: "Denied boarding, granted history," and above it all, in every sky she helped transform. Her legacy continues to glide, not like a jet roaring for attention, but like a feather of purpose catching the wind, forever ascending. Forever, Monique. 10 years after her passing, the world had not moved on from Dr. Monique Ellison. It had moved because of her. Entire aviation academies bore her name. The Ellison Protocol had become the gold standard for anti-bias procedures in global transportation systems, translated into 34 languages. Every new commercial pilot, regardless of country, was required to take a training module based on her leadership. Philosophy, flight with integrity. And still, something even more profound was unfolding. In the heart of Nairobi, a girl named Zawadi Barefoot, brilliant and barely 11, stood at a classroom chalkboard. The assignment: name a leader who changed the world without leading. A nation? She didn't hesitate. Dr. Monique Ellison, she wrote in big, bold letters. She didn't just fly planes. She flew possibilities. Her teacher, quietly moved, submitted that chalkboard photo to a global essay competition. It went viral. Donations poured in. Within months, a new school was built in Zawadi's village, complete with flight simulators, solar labs, and a digital library. It was named Ellison Academy for Global Girls, the first of its kind on the continent. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, in an old hangar converted into a tech innovation lab, Donitha robotics engineer Monique, once mentored, now led a team of women developing autonomous aircraft for disaster relief. On the wall of her lab was Monique's favorite quote: hand-painted in copper. "We don't fight for seats, we build the sky." That phrase found its way into songs, murals, coins, and even a poem etched on the inside panel of a new electric commercial aircraft called the Ellison, won the first net-zero jet in history. And once a year, on the day of Monique's passing, airports across the globe dimmed their lights for 81 seconds, one for every year she graced the earth. For that brief moment, the skies felt still, like they were pausing to honor a pilot who had never taken the yoke but who had guided so many safely through storms. Then came the greatest tribute of all. On a crisp, clear morning at the Kennedy Space Center, the Artemis 7 crew prepared to launch toward Mars. The ship was equipped with a symbolic payload capsule containing messages, inventions, and personal keepsakes from world changers. Inside the capsule, a digital replica of Dr. Ellison's original boarding pass from the flight that started it all. Underneath it, a short inscription: "She was pulled from one flight, so the rest of us could reach the stars." As the engines ignited and the rocket roared into the heavens, Monique's legacy left Earth for the final time, not in protest, not in pain, but in power. Power that moved quietly. Power that never asked for permission. Power that simply arose. And far above the clouds, past the sky she once reclaimed. Her story kept going on every liftoff, in every lesson. Through every girl who now stands tall and says, "I don't need this seat. I am the vessel." And so she flies still. Not on wings of metal, but on wings of meaning. Forever carried, forever airborne. Forever Ellison. 20-5 years after Dr. Monique Ellison's quiet defiance reshaped the skies, the world prepared for the dedication of a new global terminal. At the International Aeronautics and Peace Pavilion in Geneva, the structure was unlike anything before it. Part airport, part university, part museum, it's a sanctuary for ideas, diplomacy, and innovation built on the belief that travel, connection, and dignity were human rights, not privileges. At the heart of this monumental space stood the Ellison Atrium, a dome of crystal glass shaped like the underside of a wing in flight. Suspended in the center, a holographic sculpture of a boarding pass slowly rotating, glowing with the inscription, "One denied." Millions ascended. World leaders gathered beneath it. Innovators, poets, and pilots walked the same polished floors. But no moment carried more weight than when a new generation of students, many born after Monique's death, took the stage. One by one, they shared their dreams. A girl from Detroit who coded her first drone from spare parts. A Syrian refugee who dreamed of designing peaceful corridors of travel between divided nations. A young boy from rural India who built a medical supply drone powered by wind and hope. Each of them carried a card in their pocket, an honorary boarding pass from Gate A1, and then, as the final student stood, a young woman in a tailored suit with hair in tight coils and confidence in her step, she read aloud the words Monique had once whispered into history: "You don't have to fight to be seen. Just keep building. And when they finally look your way, let what you've built speak for itself." The audience rose in quiet reverence, not in mourning, but in motion. That same week, an asteroid mapping satellite launched from a private orbital station. Its name, Ellison. It carried no passengers, but it carried a purpose: to chart pathways through space as fearlessly as she had done on Earth, and in classrooms, in war rooms, in moon colonies, and ocean hubs. Her name became more than history. It became language to Ellison, something now meant to transform injustice into innovation, to answer doubt with direction, to rise and take others with you. At the original airport where it all began, Terminal 1 had long since been renamed the Ellison Concourse. No longer a site of humiliation, but a sanctuary of learning. Inside, children watched holographic recreations of that fateful day. Not to relive pain, but but to understand how one act of stillness echoed into movement around the globe. And in the center of that terminal, a final sculpture stood. It was not of Monique's face, nor her body, nor even her plane. It was of a hand, open palm offering a boarding pass. On it were engraved the words, "For you. Fly wisely and build more skies." Because she hadn't just opened a door, she had built a gate. And from that gate, the world no longer waited to be invited. It simply took off, still rising, still reaching. Forever. Ellison. 50 years to the day since the world first heard the name Dr. Monique Ellison. The United Nations convened a historic summit not on Earth, but aboard the orbital research vessel Unity Station, humanity's first permanent residence in space. Delegates from over 100 nations, floating in zero gravity, gathered not to negotiate war or trade, but to honor legacy. The occasion: the opening of the Ellison Chamber of Global Resolve, a circular observatory lined with stories etched in metal panels, each recounting the quiet revolutions led by those once silenced or sidelined. At the center of the chamber was an object, encased in transparent polymer, suspended without gravity. The very same boarding pass Monique had once held. The one from the flight that tried to erase her. Only now, it wasn't paper, it was gold, and beneath it, in multiple languages, a message from Earth's most revered daughter. They thought they were canceling a trip. They were launching a movement. Back home on Earth, monuments no longer told her story. People did. Pilots taught it during training. Teachers told it to children learning about courage. Mothers whispered it to daughters boarding their first flights alone. And in every corner of the world, somewhere, a girl sat by a window with stars in her eyes and a future in her hands, writing essays, coding blueprints, stitching flight suits with her initials on the collar. M.E. Monique Ellison. But the true legacy was not in initials. It was in impact. Aviation policy no longer tolerated profiling. Global travel networks now use AI systems built in part from her company's original neural ethics framework to flag systemic bias before it happened. Prevention had become the norm, not just apology. One final chapter unfolded when an ancient, decommissioned aircraft was found rusting in a hangar in Arizona. It was the original jet from that day, the one she was removed from. Its shell was dented, its paint faded, but a team of former Gate A1 students restored it. Piece by piece. They didn't put it in a museum. They turned it into a traveling classroom retrofitted with tech, hope, and memory. It was renamed the Ellison Flight Hand. It circled the globe year-round, offering free aviation training to marginalized youth. It never sold a ticket. It gave them away, and whenever someone boarded, they were handed a replica of her pass. On the back, a final quote no one would ever forget. "You are not the seat they assign you. You are the sky you dare to imagine." At the very end of her story, Monique Ellison had become more than a pioneer, more than a CEO, more than a legend. She became a verb. To Ellison, something became the highest compliment in any language. It meant you stood up by staying seated. You soared by lifting others. You answered the insult with the infinite, and so the world, its people, its ships, its cities, its dreams kept rising, on new wings, built from old wounds, charting skies she once only dreamed of. And somewhere, out there, between the stars and the soil, Monique's legacy flies still, unshaken, unapologetic, unbound, forever Ellison, forever airborne, or ours. A full century had passed since that quiet history-making moment on the tarmac. The year was 2125, and Earth looked nothing like it once did. Towering green cities stretched toward the atmosphere. Autonomous airships glided silently through. Solar-charged jet streams and quantum bridges connected continents not in hours, but in minutes. Yet, amid all the technological marvels, one name remained sacred. Ellison, not as a footnote in history, but as a foundation. The world now celebrated Ellison Day every April 17th, the date she was removed from Flight 2037, not as a reminder of injustice, but as a global call to rise above it. On this day, no one boarded flights without first pausing for 81 seconds. DYP seconds dimmed. Voices quieted, and children across the globe watched a short film titled "One Step Off the Plane, One Leap into History." In the most advanced city, in the Sky Nova Stratos, a floating metropolis 12 miles above the Earth, a tower named Ellison Spire reached beyond the clouds. Inside was the Monique Ellison Center for Ethical Innovation, a think tank where the brightest minds from every culture and background gathered to solve planetary problems with one question guiding them: will this elevate everyone? But the most remarkable tribute was not built from steel or stone. It was biological. Researchers at the New Geneva Biomedical Institute discovered a rare neural pattern among their most resilient, emotionally intelligent students. The same pattern kept emerging: calm under stress, confidence under pressure, and the capacity to transform injustice into innovation. They named it the Ellison response. It was proof, finally, that grace could be encoded, that dignity could be passed not just through story, but through spirit. And then came one final miracle. On the edge of Saturn's moon Titan, in a colony known as Harmonia, a young girl was born. Her name, Ellison Vega Miriam, the first child ever born off Earth to carry Monique's name as her first. She would grow up surrounded by books, stars, and stories, not just of what Monique endured, but what she built. At age 10, she stood on the viewing deck of the Titan colony, looking back at the tiny blue dot of Earth. She held a worn replica boarding pass in her pocket, passed down for generations, and whispered to the stars, "I'll fly farther, Monique, and I'll take them with me." A nearby AI archivist softly spoke, programmed long ago with Monique's actual voice. It replied, "That's what I hoped for, child. Not that you'd worship my footsteps, but that you'd leave your own." And so, on a moon that once held nothing but cold and silence, a legacy warmed the air. Because Monique Ellison never needed a seed to make change. She needed only one moment, one insult, one choice, and she turned it into flight paths across galaxies. No longer just a woman on a plane, but the reason we all knew how to fly. And still, she rises beyond Earth, beyond history. Forever Ellison by the year 2150. The name Ellison was no longer spoken with all alone, it was spoken as truth. Across galaxies, now linked by solar bridges and wormhole relays, humanity had evolved into an interplanetary species. From the floating academies of Venus' upper atmosphere to the underground gardens of Mars, there existed one common phrase etched into airlocks, vessel hatches, and station walls: respect is not granted by gravity. It is carried in how we lift each other. Ellison Principle 01. That phrase belonged to what was now universally known as the Ellison Codex, a moral and operational document that replaced outdated bureaucratic codes in interstellar travel, diplomacy, and education. It was not written in complex language. It was written in clarity, modeled after the woman whose quiet decision created the foundation for ethical movement through space and time. Every pilot, AI steward, diplomat, and first contact officer was trained in its pages, and deep within the Unity Nexus, a massive interstellar ring city floating at the edge of the Andromeda Corridor, was a glowing archive known as the Ellison Vault. Not a vault for treasure. A vault for stories. Inside lived thousands of personal narratives collected over 125 years of people whose lives were changed because of that one moment, when a black woman in a tailored suit was told she didn't belong in her seat, and responded by building a new world instead. The vault wasn't just digital, It was alive, powered by emotion-sensitive AI that spoke each story aloud only when someone approached with humility, not fame-seeking. And above its entrance stood a sculpture made of nanoglass and memory steel. It didn't show Monique's face. It didn't show a plane. It showed a silhouette of a woman walking forward. Her shadow made of stars, and just below, etched in a universal script that all languages could read, they delayed her departure. She advanced our destiny. On Earth, her story was now part of genetic memory banks coded into the curriculum of every child at age 6. Not as a tale of oppression, but of possibility. Children built replica boarding passes in class. They designed new gates that weren't for planes, but for ideas. And they learned that legacy wasn't what you leave behind. It's what you set in motion. One day, in a classroom high above the clouds in Airborne Learning Hub 9, a teacher asked a group of 10-year-olds, "What does it mean to Ellison something?" A boy with glowing braids raised his hand. "Means when they try to stop you, you don't yell. You build something they can't stop." The class clapped, and far beyond that classroom, beyond Jupiter's rings and Neptune's blue hush, a new ship launched from the Titan research base. Its name, the M.E. Ellison. Not a transport vessel. A peacecraft designed for first contact diplomacy. With sentient life on its hull, surrounded by 42 languages, was the phrase that had lasted centuries. "I am not here to conquer. I am here to connect." Dr. Monique Ellison's the ship disappeared into the quiet black of interstellar unknown. Its trajectory wasn't a curve, it was a rise, because when history finally remembers what truly launched humanity into the stars, it won't be the rockets, it'll be the reason behind the rise. It'll be her forever, Ellison, forever rising. Forever the gate that opened the galaxy. The year is 2200. Earth is no longer the center of human civilization, it's one of many sacred starting points. Colonies flourish across moons and exoplanets. The sky is no longer a ceiling, but a corridor. Children are born in orbital habitats. Cities float on the rings of Saturn. Trade moves at the speed of thought. And through it all, one thread still weaves through every movement, every lawn, every launch: Ellison. Her legacy, once born of silence, now hums in every corner of the known universe, in the stellar accord of 2198. A document that replaced the fractured Yample begins with 5 words. This began at Gate A1, and so it did. Not with war, not with conquest, but with a moment of injustice so casual, so routine, it nearly passed. Without history noticing, until one woman chose not to push back with anger, but to build forward with purpose. Now, on New Earth, the capital planet of the Terran Coalition, the Ellison Beacon stands at the heart of Unity Square, a monolithic tower of light. It pulses slowly every 81 seconds, each pulse symbolizing one year she lived, one lesson she gave, one ripple she caused. It is not silent. It sings, not with music, but with the thousands of voices who rose because she did, each evening. When the stars begin to spin across the dome of the artificial sky, a holographic projection appears above the beacon, a single boarding pass, floating, rotating, glowing softly. No destination, no seat number, just a name, Dr. Monique Ellison, and below it, a final truth. She wasn't trying to arrive. She was becoming the journey. That same phrase now appears in every interstellar ship's core AI interface as a soft, closing message before sleep mode. Even machines, in this age, carry her wisdom in the outer reaches of the Alarian star belt. A child named Luma drifts in her sleep pod aboard the research vessel Vigil. She is a descendant of Donnie, a roboticist Monique once mentored. Her mother told her stories of a woman who once lost a seat on a flight and claimed a seat in eternity instead. Luma clutches a relic, a 200-year-old replica of that same boarding pass. She had found it tucked between the pages of a book called The Sky You Dare to Imagine. As she closes her eyes, her pod hums softly, and the Ellison interface whispers, "Rest well, young one. There are skies left to shape. And your name belongs among them." Back on Earth, in the original city where it all began, the site of Gate A1 is now a sanctuary. No longer part of an airport. Now it is the Ellison World Portal, a gathering ground for universal ceremonies, where people take their first steps toward leadership, not just travel. It is custom now, before any great mission, whether to Mars, deep space, or even oceanic cores, that the crew silently walks through the gate, a one arch. Not for superstition, but for grounding, for remembering. Because what Monique Ellison proved, in one quiet, unwavering moment, was this: the future is not something we board. It's something we build one seat, one choice, one refusal at a time. And long after the engines fade, long after planets change hands and new species emerge, her story will still glide through the stars like a whisper carried on light. I wasn't removed, I was redirected. And I made sure everyone could fly. Forever Ellison. Forever becoming. Forever the wings of the human soul. By year 2300, humanity had crossed into an age where distance no longer defined separation. Empathy, not empire, governed expansion. The stars were not colonized, they were communed with. And orbiting the twin suns of the planet Serapha, a sentient AI satellite named A1 Ellison circled endlessly, transmitting one message to every new civilization encountered: you are seen, you are worthy. Let us rise together. This satellite wasn't designed for defense. It was designed for introduction, for offering dignity before demand. Every syllable in its core greeting sequence was derived from a historical, emotional map based on the only moment in human history that had changed the trajectory of justice without a war. Gate A. 1, April 17, 2025. Earth and the woman who did not push back with rage, but created space for everyone else to rise. Dr. Monique Ellison, back on Earth now, a living museum of legacy. Atmosphere protected and spiritually preserved, the Ellison Lightwalk attracted visitors from across systems. It was not a monument. It was a path. A single glass bridge extending over a sea of clouds, etched with hundreds of millions of names. Each name belonged to someone who had written in over the centuries to say, because of her, I flew, I spoke, I stayed, I dreamed. At the center of the bridge, there was no statue, just a bronze bench, a replica of the one outside Gate A1, exactly where Monique had once sat waiting to board the flight she never took. Visitors were invited to sit there not to worship, but to remember what choices cost and what courage creates. And there, every Ellison day, one seat was always reserved, empty. Facing the stars, children came to touch it. Elders came to weep. Pilots came to pause. On one such day, a 7-year-old non-binary child named Sol, descendant of the first interstellar diplomat from Mars, stood before a crowd and said, "When they ask who saved the skies, I won't say a general. I won't say a king. I'll say a woman who stayed seated and still moved the world." The recording of that speech was encoded into the celestial recorder vault of human truths destined to outlast matter, time, and even memory. But perhaps the most profound tribute came when an entirely new species, discovered in the crystal forests of Kepler-4, for to be asked Earth's diplomats one question after years of peaceful exchange: who taught your kind to approach with grace instead of grasp? The answer was given without hesitation. Not a politician, not a conqueror, not a scientist, but a woman, a black woman, who lost her seat and gave the rest of us wings in the final stanza of the Galactic Charter of Harmony, written in over 5,000 languages and signed by 73 life forms. One name was placed alone at the bottom: Ellison, because by then, the name no longer meant a person. It meant the way forward, the way to rise without pushing down, the way to speak without shouting, the way to transform insult into invitation. And so, as long as ships fly, as long as stars pulse, as long as beings dream of movement, dignity, and belonging, there will be one path they all walk, the one she cleared with silence, the one she paved with principle, the one she named without needing credit: Forever Ellison. The first seat, the final word, the flight without end. By the dawn of the 3000s, no map in the known universe lacked a marker bearing her legacy. From asteroid listening stations to consciousness stream gardens orbiting pulsars, the Ellison Way became more than a philosophy, became law. Her story, once just a quiet incident in an airport, was now sung in languages without syllables, drawn in symmetries by life forms without eyes, felt in rhythms by entities who communicated only through pulse and light. They didn't know boarding passes. They didn't know airlines, but they knew her, because every civilization that chose peace over power, respect over rank, and unity over rank, and unity over rank, and unity over wank, they reside only reside. They disastewed, they know why do they tell. They survive why they tell what. My walleye, my salive, my devileye, my walleye calorie, sabai my way to kaidaway. We sakai to sabli it, we sagoi kai it. It's unsleely sekanai bakai kakai to sawi it's sikok it to be sitikaks, it's ikakitla light I goes at it to bide it be tot beak ectus sitikitated who it ego walked the path she carved, and at the center of the luminous archive, a sentient library adrift at the edge of the last charted galaxy. Her voice, reconstructed from historical vibrations, still speaks to any traveler who seeks guidance. When they deny you entry, build a door no one owns. When they question your right to rise, answer with flight. And then, just a whisper. You were never just a passenger. You've always been the pilot. She didn't build rockets. She didn't govern nations. She didn't wage war. She sat still. When the world tried to push her aside and made that stillness so powerful, it launched generations into motion. From one denied seat came 1,000 open skies. This is not just her legacy. It's our instruction. It's our invitation. It's our flight plan board when you're ready. Because the gate she opened never closed. Forever Ellison, forever rising. Forever the reason we all know how to fly.